Buddhism is completely and totally in favour of happiness. Buddhism is so in favour of happiness that Buddhism says that kind of everyday happiness that we have, those kind of moments of joy and so on, they're not enough. Buddhism says they're not enough. Buddhism says we should be aiming for total, complete and everlasting happiness, which, you won't be surprised to know, is one of the characteristics of enlightenment. Now, people often think of Buddhism as a sort of a life-denying religion, as a religion which says that the kind of ordinary pleasures and good things in life are somehow bad or evil, or that they're suffering or something like that. And to be honest, a lot of Buddhists think like that as well. And I'm here to tell you that that's wrong. Buddhism doesn't say any of those things. So I want to talk a little bit about the Four Noble Truths, and in particular the First Noble Truth. These are the foundational teachings of Buddhism. So when the Buddha first sat down and taught, he taught these Four Noble Truths. And you'll often see the first one, the truth of dukkha, translated or rendered as life is suffering. But what the Buddha is actually saying is not everything in life is agony. He's saying samsara, that is ordinary existence, ordinary unenlightened life, he's saying that kind of life is intrinsically filled with dukkha. Now, dukkha is a really interesting word, and this is the word that is often translated as suffering. It can mean suffering, but it can also mean very, very minor irritation or very, very minor dissatisfaction. Dukkha means everything from total agony all the way through to very, very minor dissatisfaction. The kind of dissatisfaction you get if you put too much milk in your tea. Or the kind of dissatisfaction you get if for some reason you woke up and you looked at your dirty laundry and you thought, oh, I've got to do that now. It includes that as well as having your leg hacked off or being in a car accident. So dukkha means everything. It's the full scale from total agony right the way down to very, very minor dissatisfactions. And this is important because if the Buddha is actually saying ordinary life is filled with dissatisfaction, that's much easier to relate to. And what the Buddha was saying was that all of us experience dissatisfaction. There is no part of samsara, and there are no people within samsara who are without dissatisfaction. And another way of looking at that is that the Buddha was saying there is no one in samsara who is happy. There is no one in samsara who is completely happy 100% of the time. So if you look at the First Noble Truth in that way, then the idea that life is dukkha or samsaric life is dukkha is really starting with the idea that life is not happy all the time. And the other three Noble Truths are all about the fact that you can eliminate dukkha, dissatisfaction, and how to do it. So if you look at the Four Noble Truths in that context, what the Buddha is actually saying is we should all be totally happy. And we're not. And we should be. And it's a good idea to be. So in that way, as I understand the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha is very, very pro-happiness. And all his teachings thereafter, and frankly all of the other teachings, all the sort of tantric teachings you get in Tibetan Buddhism, they all come down to this one point of eliminating suffering and ensuring complete and total happiness for the practitioner, and that the practitioner helps others to be happy totally and completely as much as the practitioner can. It's also important to understand exactly what Buddhism does say about pleasure, about everyday kinds of joy, everyday kind of happiness. Buddhism does not say that sense pleasures and other forms of happiness are wrong, or in fact that they cause suffering. What Buddhism says is that clinging on to those sense pleasures causes suffering. So to take an example, If we have a really nice meal, like let's say sushi or something, I love sushi, right? If I have sushi, I am temporarily happy, right? And that happiness is real happiness. There's no point saying, and Buddhism doesn't say, that that isn't happiness, that I don't feel better after having eaten it than I did before. What Buddhism says is that what causes us suffering is our clinging. So in the sushi example, I might have spent quite a long time really anticipating some good sushi. I'm at home, I'm at work, and I'm just thinking to myself while I'm sitting at my desk, I really, really want some sushi. That desire, that clinging to the idea of having some sushi, that anticipation, is dissatisfactory. It is not good. It is suffering. It might be a relatively minor form of suffering, but it's still suffering. And then, after I've had the sushi, I might think to myself, oh, well, actually, I want some more now. And then again, you've got that desire back, and you've got that suffering again. Or I might think to myself, oh, actually, that sushi wasn't so good. It wasn't really worth it. It wasn't worth the money, you know? And again, you're into a form of suffering, albeit a minor one. And obviously, clinging can produce far more intense suffering than that. So, for example, people who desperately, desperately want someone as their romantic partner, you know? They're really, really clinging to the idea of having that person, and for whatever reason, they can't have them. It's miserable. It's horrendous. And what causes suffering is the clinging to that idea of having that person. If you weren't clinging to that idea, you wouldn't be having that problem. You wouldn't be having that suffering. So having is fine. It's clinging that's the problem. Having sense pleasures, having sort of everyday, ordinary happiness is fine. Having the things that provide us with that is fine. But we must try and reduce the clinging, because unless we get rid of the clinging, we're going to suffer a lot. Of course, there are some circumstances where we shouldn't pursue what we want, where we shouldn't have what we want, because either it will hurt us, or it will hurt someone else, or we've taken a vow not to do it. And in those circumstances, we shouldn't pursue or try and get or have the things that make us happy. But that's not because the having is the problem. That's for the other reasons I've just mentioned. There's nothing wrong with getting a house. The problem is anticipating and clinging to the idea that you're going to get a house. So it's not the having, it's the clinging. And that is why the methods of Buddhism focus on ending the clinging. And just to be clear, there's lots and lots of suffering that looks like the opposite of desire, that looks like aversion. So I don't want this, I don't want that. But when you think about it, every aversion is actually a desire. It's a desire for that thing not to materialize. So for example, you might have an aversion to being ill. You really, really don't want to get ill. But then you could equally say your desire is to stay well. So it's two sides of the same thing. However you characterize it, whether it's an aversion to being ill or to not having sushi, or a desire to stay well, or a desire to have sushi, they're two sides of the same coin. Buddhism goes further than just saying we should be totally happy. Buddhism says happiness is so good that we should share it with everyone. And not just humans, but animals as well. So particularly in what are called Mahayana schools of Buddhism, the emphasis is on helping others to be happy. Or to put it another way, helping others eliminate their suffering. There's a saying in Tibetan Buddhism, when I am happy, may my happiness flow to others, may joy fill the sky. When I am unhappy, may the sorrows of all beings be mine, may the ocean of suffering run dry. So what this is all about is helping others to be happy. Now the second part sounds a bit like we're taking on suffering. And that is what's going on. But the reason we're taking on suffering is so that others can be without suffering, which helps others be happy. And of course, within Tibetan Buddhism, there are many, many ways of transforming that suffering. So when we take on the suffering, we don't just sort of martyr ourselves and feel unhappy. We transform that suffering into something positive, into enlightened energy. Happiness is an inside job. And this was something that was first said to me by a very good Dharma practitioner who I have a lot of respect for. And basically it means that the things out there in the world will not do the job. They will not make you happy permanently. They'll give you fleeting happiness, they'll give you a bit of pleasure now and then, but they won't give you total lasting happiness. And the clinging that we practice, the clinging that we have towards these things makes us very unhappy. It's the root of all our suffering. Happiness is an inside job. If we want to be happy, we need to be totally content and happy with ourselves. We need to be happy because we are who we are, and that's all we need. So there we are. Buddhism is pro-happiness. Buddhism is so pro-happiness that it says we shouldn't settle for budget 99p ordinary happiness. We should go for gold. We should have the best possible happiness that lasts forever, which is an aspect of enlightenment. Buddhism says that the clinging we have to ordinary happiness is an obstacle to our true happiness, and happiness is an inside job. I hope that's been useful. If you liked it, please hit the like and subscribe buttons, and I hope to see you next time.